Pleasure. Thank you.
Great to have you. I've known Ben for a few years and seen him present quite a few times. And the reason we've asked him to come on now is because obviously it's January. I want to kickstart the new year in style. I appreciate it's nearly the end of January, but I always think it's a bit of a false start to the year. We've all got a lot of kids to get back to school and admin and stuff to sort out. So hopefully now you're starting to think properly about business growth again. And one of the common challenges we found with our clients last year, which has been evident speaking to Ben with his clients as well, is the problem of getting customers to sign up and getting customers and that sales cycle becoming prolonged. So lots of our clients telling us that things were getting stuck in the sales cycle and they didn't know whether they're going to get sign off and taking longer than usual, and all that kind of stuff really. So Ben's got a framework that I think helps us just to mature that sales process. So I think often the challenge with an owner operator is that you sort of have a way of going through a sales process. A lot of it's probably in your head. You have a feel for things, which has its benefits, but we can also develop that with a bit of a framework as well. And Ben's going to share some of that today just to make it a little bit more organized, if you like, from a sales process perspective. And as it says on the title, today is going to be mainly focused on the inquiry stage. So when you first get an inquiry in, how to qualify that. So hopefully there's going to be some really good stuff for you all today. As I say, any questions, pop it in the Q&A and Ben will be delighted to answer at the end. Otherwise, over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. Happy almost the end of January. I know it's a long month, long nights, dark nights. Probably some of you have been off the beers and the booze as well. So I think happily we are near approaching the end of a long month. But as Paul said, I'm going to be talking today about the first stage of a typical sales process, and that is the qualifying conversation. So this is a conversation most appropriate for kind of inbound leads, so people that are approaching us and stating an interest in wanting to potentially work with us. But I think if we look back at 2023, it was a bit of a strange old year, really. We weren't officially in recession, but things definitely felt a lot slower. I got the sense that a lot of people were quite looking forward to seeing the end of 2023 for various different reasons. And I think if we then hone in a little bit more on kind of the new business process, there are certain things that I certainly saw my clients experience, and I imagine some of you may have experienced these things as well. But from a client's point of view, I certainly found in speaking to clients that in the search for kind of quick fixes, better results or lower fees, a lot of agencies were experiencing kind of more speculative inquiries coming through. People were maybe a little bit more risk adverse. You had to work that a little bit harder to kind of build a business case, to have people invest in doing something new or different compared to the status quo. Probably found there were more stakeholders involved in decisions, and that's something we're going to talk about today, the importance of understanding that kind of stakeholder picture. And certainly something we all experienced was greater price sensitivity when it got to the actual proposal or presentation. There was a definite downward pressure on fees. Clients were looking to rein in costs, just at a time, of course, when agencies are looking to actually increase their prices to cover the increase in salaries and so on and so on. And in respect to what we're going to be talking about again today, once you put forward your solution, you probably found decisions were taking a lot longer to happen. Sometimes decisions were being put on hold for weeks, for months. Maybe you had to find yourself going back a stage or two in the sales process before you could then move forward again. And even when you got a yes and got the contract out, you still find that actually the contract takes weeks or months to come back, and sometimes doesn't come back at all, which clearly is hugely frustrating. And then even if they do come back, you might have then been asked to lower your prices. So these are all kind of symptoms that aren't necessarily true of every single agency. I think it was a bit of a mixed bag last year. Some did really well, some were struggling, some sort of somewhere in the middle. But I think the overriding theme in anybody I spoke to last year was a lot more dither, delay, indecision, things going on hold, a little bit more ghosting than perhaps we're accustomed to than during kind of normal times, whatever they are, because of course it doesn't really feel like we've had a normal year for quite some time. So I just want to kind of put that to the test. Paul's got a little poll question, just to see how true this is for you guys. So what I'd just like you to respond to the question is, did your average lead time, so when I talk about lead time, that's from when the inquiry first comes in through to a decision being taken and moving forward. And last year, if you think about all your sales opportunities, did that lead time increase? Did it decrease? Or did it stay roughly the same? Take a moment just to fire your answer. We'll have a look at the response to that in a moment, while I move on. So what does this mean with regards to your sales process? When you do have that increase in dither, delay, things going on hold, etc., what does that mean? For me, it means you need to double down on your qualifying, the qualifying aspect of your sales process. You've got to be more robust in weeding out those kind of serious buyers from the tire kickers. The tire kickers being those people that are just not in a position or not ready to move forward. They're not ready to make that change, whatever that may be. Moving agency, increasing investment, building a new website, whatever that may look like. So it means when that kind of hot lead kind of comes in, you need to slow things down. And I think as an industry, we tend to try and speed things up. And I'm just going to start to share my screen now just to show you what I mean here. You should now be able to see a typical agency sales process. Now, what tends to happen is we get an inquiry come in. We get quite excited about that, and we jump on a call with a prospect, and we ask them a series of questions. Often they're quite tactical in their nature. They tend to be about the service under discussion. And then we jump far too quickly into writing a proposal or a presentation. And what that means is that essentially we are missing out a number of key conversations whereby we are able to ask key questions, whereby we are able to build rapport and feel more confident that by the time we get to actually presenting or giving a proposal over to the prospect, that there's going to be a higher chance of them actually moving forward with that. Now, if we actually think about what that means in terms of conversion rates, this is some data taken from the Wow Company Bench Press report. Just 17% of agencies are converting 61% or more of their proposals. I think that's incredibly low. On the reverse side, almost 50% of agencies are converting less than 40% of their proposals. Now, we seem to now accept that we have to write 5 presentations or 5 proposals in order to win one of those. We almost accept average as being good, but I actually think these numbers are quite scary when you think about the amount of time, effort, resource, headspace we are wasting writing proposals for prospects that really aren't actually in a position to buy. I believe an agency should be converting at about 60 to 70% of their proposals. And you do that not just by being better at your sales process and better at writing proposals, but you actually do it by being better at qualifying. You do it by weeding out those that aren't in position to buy and focusing your attention on those that are. So today, with this in mind, I'm going to be sharing some thoughts and ideas on how do you do that? How do you spend more time on opportunities you stand that better chance of winning and get rid of those ideally early in the process that you don't. And we're going to look at that first stage of our sales process, the qualifying conversation. So what do we mean when we say sort of qualifying? There are various different, I suppose, interpretations, if you like, of what that actually means. But in short, it's really a kind of it's a vetting exercise. It's the starting point for most leads that would come in. It's inappropriate if, for example, you were reaching out to a lead and they said, yes, we'd like to have a meeting, because in all likelihood, they're not actually in the market right now. So if you jump straight into a qualifying style conversation about how much money you've got, etc., that's going to be less appropriate. So the qualifying conversation as the first stage in our sales process is more appropriate and better used when a lead comes into us. So as I said, it's a vetting style exercise. You are vetting the prospect to see if they're a good fit for you. And they are, of course, vetting you to see if you are a good fit for them. It's kind of as simple as that, really. But what I tend to find is that we don't go deep enough with that exercise of vetting. As I alluded to earlier with that sort of mock sales process, we kind of have a conversation. We don't necessarily cover everything we need to cover in that conversation, but we commit very early to writing a proposal. And sometimes that's down to us wanting to kind of move quickly to a proposal. Often it's down to the prospect. They're saying, yes, I'd like a proposal on my desk by Tuesday. And we go, okay, then we'll do that. And we rush far too quickly to that step in our process. Whereas actually what this should be is a slower sort of process of exploration between you and the prospect to establish if you're a good fit, and if indeed you should even get to that proposal stage. It's really about working together to establish if there's a good fit and to come up with the proposal together as well. Now, the basis for qualifying is something that looks a little bit like this. I call this an ideal client profile. I've heard other words and phrases describe it: target audience, buyer profile, something like that. But essentially, this is the basis of how you go about qualifying. If you are working through a positioning project, for example, for your agency, this would be one of the outputs. It would be defining what does the right client look like for us. And I look at things like sectors, company traits, things like size, whether they have an in-house team, what the ideal budget would look like, what's the culture like, because we want to be working with kind of like-minded organizations and also people, of course, as well. And what's their kind of situation? Typically, where is a business like this on their journey? So the output of a positioning project should be something that looks like this. You should have a really well-defined and clear idea of what the right client looks like, because this is therefore your framework. And whoever is doing the qualifying in your agency, they use this as the framework by which they decide if somebody is a good fit or not. Now, it doesn't mean you never compromise on this or you never compromise on aspects of this. It's an ideal client profile, which means that unfortunately, not every single prospect is necessarily going to tick every single box. But when you do compromise, you're able to use this and speak to the team and explain where and why you perhaps have compromised on that ideal client profile. Now, when a lead comes in, you can do a bit of desk-based research before you even jump on a call on the basis of this ideal client profile. And if they're not a particularly good fit, I'd suggest you don't waste your time on a half-hour call trying to find that out. Send them an email, politely decline. Maybe you pass it to another agency if you have a network of kind of partner agencies. But you can do a little bit of desk-based research before you even commit at the beginning to giving up your time to that first qualifying call. Now, when you break it down and we think about the sales process, really what we're talking about are a series of conversations, really. And if you want to be more effective at selling, really what you need to focus on is how you master each of those conversations in the process. And this is an example of the first conversation, or how you might phrase setting up the qualifying conversation. It might go something like this: we tend to work best with clients who, and then you would describe typically what a client looks like for you in their current situation. You then describe the purpose of this first conversation. It's to establish if we like to be a good fit for you and vice versa. I've got a few questions I'd like to throw your way, and I'm sure you'll have a few questions for me. If we get to the end of the call and agree in principle that there's a good fit here, I suggest we arrange a second meeting where we then explore your requirements in more detail and how we'd work together. And then we might say something like, we can also bring in some of the subject matter experts from our side and anybody from your end that needs to be involved. How does that sound? Now, you might kind of look at those words and, yeah, okay, and think they're fairly inconsequential. But actually, when you start to break this down and think about the words themselves, there's actually quite a lot of power in these words. And I'll just kind of break it down a little bit and explain why. At the beginning, when we say something like we tend to work with clients who, we're kind of saying to them, look, we don't just work with anybody here. You know, we have a good idea of what the right client looks like for us. And therefore, the purpose of this call is really to establish if you are going to be a good fit for us. It kind of shows you're not desperate, which I think is quite important in the sales. Sometimes we kind of can come across as a little bit overexcitable, a bit like a puppy. And we need to sort of slow down and just be a little bit more measured in how we talk to people. The purpose of this first conversation, we're making it very clear just with those words that we have a process and we have this first conversation. There is a specific purpose behind it. We're not going to be rushed into writing a proposal. We're slowing things down again, and we're explaining the point of this first conversation. I suggest we arrange a second meeting. Again, it shows you've got steps in your process. You're not going to be rushed into writing a proposal. This is the first stage of a series of conversations. And the second one is where you would take a deeper dive into their requirements. So again, it's just showing there's a process here. We're not going to be rushed too quickly into writing a proposal. It provides a really clear scope of what we're going to cover now, and therefore what's going to be covered a little bit later on. And then really importantly, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, this line here about wanting to involve other stakeholders, both from our side and from theirs, really, really important that you're able to gain access to stakeholders as part of this sales process. And again, what we're doing here with these words is outlining, suggesting that that is going to be the thing we're going to need to do next as part of that second conversation. So we'll talk a bit more about stakeholders in a moment. So again, as I said, sales is all about really mastering conversation, and therefore language is really, really important. Now, this is how I phrase things. This is how I would talk. I'm not suggesting you copy this word for word. You need to find your own style, your own expression, your own way of feeling comfortable doing this. But it's really, really important that you do that and you are comfortable with actually having these types of conversations, because it really does help with the power dynamic moving forward, rather than just, if you like, agreeing to everything that is asked from you by the prospect and falling into line with their process. You kind of want to say, no, hold on a minute, we have our process and this is the first stage of that. So let's assume you sent them an email. They've agreed to an initial qualifying style conversation. What kind of questions do you want to be asking on this first call? So this is where we've got some more sort of practical advice, if you like, and again, lots of examples of questions. Again, I'd encourage you to not necessarily take these word for word. It's a framework. There should be freedom and flexibility in how you take these words and use them, but it should give you a pretty decent framework with regards to mastering this kind of first qualifying conversation. And it's a really, really simple where, what, why, and who qualifying conversation framework. So the first thing we'd like to explore, the where bit, is where did they find you? And this is where we're really trying to uncover if we have an advantage, particularly if they're talking to other agencies as well. So we'll dig into that a bit more in a moment. What are they looking for? So broadly speaking, we're not going to go into a real deep dive at this stage for the purposes of the qualifying conversation. That will come next as part of a discovery call. But broadly speaking, what are they looking for? And does it kind of marry up to your areas of expertise? So is the brief, if they've got one, which is fairly rare to be quite honest, but if there is a brief, is it broadly along the right lines for our expertise? And that would include two key things: understanding the B word, budget. How much have they got to invest? And also, to what extent are they willing to explore different ideas and solutions compared to the one that they think is perhaps the right one? Because often those two things can be quite different. What a prospect thinks they need and what a prospect thinks they want and what they actually need can sometimes be quite different. Why now? This is probably most critical to the conversation today and the earlier points around dither, delay, and indecision. Is this actually a priority? Is it something they're looking to do in the immediate future? And in line with that, can we therefore get a commitment on a timeline for when they're actually going to get started? And the who bit, who else needs to be involved? I touched on this a few moments ago. This is a real strong indicator of how you are seen compared to other agencies they may be speaking to what extent you have an advantage will be dictated by whether they do allow access to other stakeholders. I'm assuming here that this is an organization that has a number of different people involved in the decision. And you want to try and get direct access to those people during the course of the process, ideally in the next stage at the discovery meeting. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment as well. So in terms of a few examples of specific questions you might use here. So where did they find you? First thing I would ask, almost the immediate first question is, how did you find us? What encouraged you to get in touch today? That could be really revealing for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if they were to say something like, well, we've been following you for a while, we saw you speak at an event, we downloaded a white paper you've written, we can see you work with these other clients in our space. That suggests to me that they've done a bit of homework and they are coming to you for a specific reason. If they say something like, well, we're just doing a bit of Google research and you guys popped up, that would suggest to me they're kind of still in research mode. They haven't really done a great deal of research about your agency. They might still be shortlisting and putting a list of agencies together, and it probably suggests they're a little bit earlier in that kind of buying journey. So just be a little bit careful with regards to that response, and look out for something that suggests they've done their homework and they've come to you for a specific reason. You also want to find out if they're speaking to other agencies. Never be afraid to ask this question. I was always amazed the number of times in my agency days where I asked them out of interest, do you mind, do you mind me asking, how many other agencies you're speaking to and who those agencies are? The number of times that the person would actually say, well, the last guy I spoke to asked the same question. I told him, so I should probably tell you as well. What's the worst that can happen? They're going to say no. But I think it's always worth trying to understand how many other agencies are in the mix, and if you can, specifically, which other agencies are they speaking to? If they won't give you the answer to that second question, then maybe a question on the lines of what criteria did you use to shortlist agencies? How did you go about that process of putting together your shortlist of agencies? And you also want to find out if there's an incumbent involved. This is really, really important. I saw a stat the other day. I'm just looking down at my notes here just to check I've got the percentage right. 66% of the time, this is a stat that came via a Forrester report, 66% of the time, if the incumbent is involved in a repitch process, they are going to win it. 66% of the time, 2/3 of the time. So I find that staggering. It does make me question why if the incumbent's doing such a bad job, which you would assume they are, that's why the client is going out to market and looking at their options, why they would still go back and work with them and continue to work with them. But it happens all the time. We've all been in that position where you go through the whole sales process and then they say at the end, oh, actually, we're just not going to do anything. We're just going to stick with the incumbent, having told you all the way through what a bad job that incumbent is doing. So some questions around that are really important. Who is the incumbent? Are they repitching? And if you're dissatisfied with the incumbent, can we just ask why they're still involved in the process? So that's your where. What are they looking for? Again, as I said, we're looking to build a general picture of their kind of current situation at this stage. We don't need to go too deep into this because the next stage in our process, the discovery style meeting, is where we get more into the meat of the brief, as it were. But this is the starting point for that kind of deeper dive conversation next time. So tell me a bit about your current situation and how we can help. Imagine we're speaking a year from now, you're delighted with your progress. What's happened to make you so happy? I've stolen that one from Blair Enns. I think that's a great future-facing question around how they want to, where they want to get to over the next kind of year or two. What would you say is currently standing in your way? So we're kind of trying to get a broad understanding of, where they are now, where they're trying to get to, what's kind of standing in their way, what's the key problem or problems that potentially they're looking for us to help them solve. And then we need to have a conversation about money early on. Okay, we tend to be quite resistant about broaching money, particularly in our country. In a personal setting, of course, it's considered quite rude to ask somebody how much they earn or how much their house is worth or something like that. But in a business setting, we must be prepared to talk about money and talk about it up front. I really like the use of the word investment rather than budget. It suggests that if I'm going to put something in, I'm going to get something back. So I tend to avoid the language of cost or the language of budget. Talk about investment. What are your expectations in terms of investment for this project? And tell me about how you arrived at that kind of figure. Is it because you've worked with other agencies before? Is it because you've seen other businesses investing a similar amount? Try and kind of understand what the context is for that number that they give you. And as I kind of mentioned about a moment ago, if a prospect comes to you with a brief, it's a self-diagnosis. It's them looking at their own problem and going, "This is the solution." But often that may be incorrect. So again, what a prospect thinks they want and what they actually need can be quite different. And they should be looking for your advice and counsel on what it is that they actually should be doing moving forward. So sometimes the brief and what they actually need might be quite different. To what extent are they willing to be challenged on that, or are they absolutely cast iron in this is what we want to buy? If you disagree that's the right way, then I believe you should be telling them. So you're looking for some flexibility here. If this is not quite the right thing, are they open to other ideas, other opportunities, other ways of solving that particular problem? The why now, as I alluded to earlier, I think this is pretty important with regards to the dither, delay, things going on hold, etc. We really want to try and understand to what extent this is something they're going to start doing right now or in the coming weeks and months, or are they just in exploratory mode at this stage? They're just kind of going out to market, seeing what's out there, seeing what agencies might be able to offer. But in terms of actually being at that kind of metaphorical start line and actually ready to go, they're 5 or 10 steps behind it. So there's a few questions again you can use here. How long have you been thinking about this? What has made you decide to move forward with this project now or in the immediate future? Where does this feature on your list of priorities? Are you working on any other projects right now that might prevent you from moving forward with this one? And what we want to try and do is kind of agree on a timeline for roughly at this stage. When do we think we're actually going to get started with this thing? When does this need to be implemented? Why is that important? And what happens if it slips? Or you can use questions around when do you need to start seeing results and almost kind of work backwards from there with respect to your timeline. So this is really, really critical, I think, to understand how serious or otherwise they are. Are they in a position to move forward fairly quickly in the not too distant future? And then who needs to be involved? As I mentioned earlier, your ability to gain access to other stakeholders that can have some influence on this decision is a really, really strong indicator of how different you are seen by the prospect. It's proven to be really, really accurate in terms of understanding a prospect's intentions. Will they give you that direct access to other people that are impacted by this project? And bear in mind that will almost always be the case, unless you're dealing just with, you know, the owner director of a business and he hasn't really got a team around him or her. In all likelihood, there are going to be 5, 6, 7 people in a typical organization that are likely to have some form of influence on a decision. So you need to understand who they are, and ideally you need to be able to speak directly and involve them in the process during the course of the sales conversation. So what stages will you be working through to come to a decision? What's going to happen at each of those stages? So you're trying to understand what kind of process they might have from their end. If you think actually they're trying to move you too quickly towards a proposal, for example, you might suggest some other steps, some additional steps to ensure that when you do put together a proposal, it's spot on, it's going to be right. You would then describe those steps and then, you know, are you happy to move forward on that basis? And again, this is all about trying to slow things down rather than speed things up too quickly towards that proposal. And then we're trying to understand that stakeholder picture. Who else does this service or this project impact? It's almost, you know, it's presumptive. How and when should we involve them? Not do you think we should? It's we need to. So it's a very kind of presumptive question there. Now, just to say with regards to that stakeholder picture, I think sometimes there's a mistake we make here, and it's to ask a question along the lines of who is the decision maker? That according to old kind of sales models like BANT, for example, that's all about trying to understand who has the authority here. Now we need to be really careful that we're not making the mistake of looking for somebody with authority and believing that that person, he or she, has the most influence. They might not. You might have somebody up here who's ultimately going to sign it off, but actually somebody further down the food chain, because they're going to be actually executing or implementing this project, they're the ones that are actually going to have more influence over it because they're more directly impacted by it. So they might actually be going back up to their senior and saying, actually, I think this is the agency we should go with, but we're spending all our time up here trying to influence the decision maker, as it were. So just be mindful of that you don't fall into the trap of just seeking out the so-called decision maker, because they might not actually in reality be the decision maker at all. Now, in terms of bringing all of this together, if you want to make this a really objective exercise, I would suggest having some kind of scorecard. Now, that doesn't take away gut feel. Sometimes things just either feel good or there's something inkling there that you're just not quite sure about, and gut feel is telling you there's just not something quite right. But I do like to try and bring as much objectivity as we possibly can around the sales process, and using some kind of scorecard that might look something like this, which aligns back to some of those questions and areas of exploration a moment ago, can be really, really useful. Now, do not ignore the red flags. As I alluded to a moment ago, there might be just certain things in your gut that just don't sit right. You may have asked certain questions where you're not necessarily getting the response that you thought you would, or you're not getting any kind of response at all. And perhaps the prospect is being quite guarded about maybe revealing their budget, about allowing you access to stakeholders, for example. The temptation will be to brush that aside and go, oh, don't worry, we'll sort that out later on. We'll still do a proposal, and hopefully things will be okay later in the process. I would urge you not to ignore those. I would urge you to try and really address those red flags or concerns earlier. because if you don't, they will come back and bite you on the bum later in the process. It's much better to try and address these things right now. And there's a really simple little framework, which I've stolen from a book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. Really good book, a few years old now, but well worth a read if you're going to put it on your sales book list. And it's a really simple 3-part response that I think works really well as part of the qualifying conversation if you're not quite able to get the information out of them that you'd be looking for. So it's 3 parts. Before we progress, I have a concern. You then state the concern or potential problem as you see it, and then you throw things back to the prospect and ask them what they think we should do in order to move forward. So to kind of bring that to life with an example, can I share with you a concern I have before we progress things any further? I understand you're wary about bringing other people into this conversation. Can I share something with you? That's a permission-based question. I really like these, that before you actually get into the question you want to ask, you tee it up with a permission-based question first. Can I share something with you first? In my experience, if we don't involve those who are impacted by this problem early in the process, it's much more difficult to get their buy-in to the solution later. So if they've turned around and said, no, we're not going to allow you to speak to other stakeholders, this is an example of how you might try and counter that. And then you ask them what they think we should do in order to move forward. So it's just a really simple, as I say, really simple kind of framework that if you can't get everything you need at this stage, you can kind of try and counter that and put the onus back on the prospect to tell you what they think should happen next. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed there was some capitalization of words like invest, explore, timeline on some of those slides. That is because they represent, if we're thinking about the sales process more broadly, they represent a number of commitments or small closes you need to secure from your prospect if you're to be confident that you can ask for the business at the end of the process. This has been inspired by 2 things. One of my mentors back in my agency taught me that the sales process is ultimately about gaining lots of small yeses. And if you gain enough of those small yeses, you stand a much better chance of getting the big yes at the end. I then read a book by an American kind of sales coach, trainer, speaker called Anthony Iannarino, called The Lost Art of Closing. I thoroughly recommend that as a book around kind of modern sales and looks at each of these commitments and small closes in a lot more depth. And that's really inspired the sales training that I do, is to think about the sales process as a series of smaller closes. And if you earn enough of those smaller closes, like their ability to invest at an appropriate level, their willingness to explore different ideas and solutions, if you can get a commitment on a timeline, if you can gain access to stakeholders and build consensus amongst them that this is the right way forward, if you can collaborate with them on the proposal rather than you just going away and coming up with something yourself, if you can gain a commitment that are actually going to be able to execute the recommended proposal you put forward, these are all small closes that you need to secure during the course of the sales process. And if you gain those small closes, you earn the right to ask for the business at the end of the process for them to actually make a decision. If you don't secure these small closes, then it's far more likely that you're going to get a no at the end, or they're going to put things on hold, dither, delay, because you haven't been able to secure these smaller closes. So I thoroughly recommend go and seek that book out, Anthony Iannarino, The Lost Art of Closing. It's a brilliant sales book and very much the framework that I recommend for how you manage a sort of a consultative sales process, especially when you're selling higher value, higher consideration products and services. The problem with a sales process like this is it just doesn't allow you enough of the conversations you need in order to be able to secure those small closes. If we have an initial half-hour conversation and then we jump too quickly into writing a proposal, essentially what we're trying to do is have that proposal do the selling for us. A proposal would never ever be as effective as you are with the right training, with the right support, with the right frameworks and ability to master conversations. Will never be as effective a proposal as you can be in being able to secure those closes. A written document just can't do that. So my recommendation to you today is to slow the process down, incorporate more conversations, separate out the qualifying conversation from the discovery one. Have a call just before you put pen to paper on the proposal. This is my favorite stage of the sales process. It's a pre-proposal check-in where you say something like, right, we've sat down with the team, we've gathered all the information. Broadly speaking, this is what we're recommending. What do you think? and you get their kind of buy-in on the solution before you put pen to paper. That's a really powerful conversation you can have during the course of the sales process. But that doesn't happen when you jump too quickly into writing a proposal or pitch deck before you've had the adequate time to really converse with the prospect along the way. So takeaways, just to finish up, qualifying is an exercise to determine if you and the prospect are a good fit. But remember, it's not a one-off event. It's not just something you do at the beginning and go, there you go, we've ticked those boxes, let's move on. There may be things that you're not quite able to establish at the beginning. That doesn't necessarily mean it's black and white. You just don't progress. But at least it gives you, when you get into that discovery conversation, a bit of a checklist of things that you need to make sure you iron out before you then move to the next stage of the process. So, as I said, it's not something that just happens at the beginning and that's it. It may be something you have to revisit at various other steps in the process. Your ideal client profile, if you don't have one, I would suggest you create this. This is your framework. It's the basis for how you qualify. Establishing who fits and who doesn't is very much determined by that ideal client profile. Always urge you, whatever stage you are in the process, to have some kind of agenda or way of teeing up the conversation. So the expectations on both sides are really clear about why we're having this conversation, where we're trying to be by the end of it, and what's going to happen or be discussed during the course of that conversation. So explain the purpose of that qualifying conversation. It has a really significant impact on the power dynamic from the beginning. It says, actually, we're not just going to fall into line with your process. We have our own process, and we're looking to lead that because we believe actually these steps in the process will give you a better outcome. And let's not forget, the sales process, the ultimate beneficiary of it is your prospect, because they will get the right solution at the end of it, the right recommendations, if they're willing to give the appropriate time in the process as well. When they're just telling you to rush towards a proposal without giving you the adequate time, answers to your questions, access to stakeholders, etc., it's more unlikely they're going to get the right solution at the end of it. So kind of pitch it like that. Say these steps are in there for your benefit. If we can converse with you, if we can involve other stakeholders, at the end of it, you're going to get the right solution. As I kind of mentioned a number of times, that direct access to stakeholders is one of the biggest indicators of how you're seen by the prospect. If they flatly refuse, then I think it's less likely you're going to win that business. So again, you want to try and involve those stakeholders during the course of the process and get their take on things. They're going to have different needs, motivations, questions, etc. You don't want to wait to the pitch meeting for them to all walk in and grill you and put you on the back foot. You want to try and understand those things earlier so you can reflect that back in your proposal later on. And in line with that, always seek to resolve the concerns or objections early. They're only ever going to surface later on in the process, and they're much more difficult to manage once they come out of the woodwork later at, say, a pitch meeting, for example. So if you have those concerns, address them up front, get them out of the way, and then make a decision as to whether you should move forward. And finally, as I alluded to at the end, closing happens in stages. If you're going to earn the right to ask for the prospect's business, which is ultimately what we have to do at some point, we have to ask them for the business and ask them quite directly towards the end of the process. You must secure these smaller closes first, or these commitments from the prospect. That's how you earn the right to ultimately ask for the business later on. Read that book. I thoroughly recommend it, which talks a lot more about that more broadly with respect to our sales process as a whole. There's a few resources in here which Paul alluded to, a few articles, one or two by yours truly, that kind of build on some of the ideas and things we've spoken about today. And there's also some links out to one or two podcast episodes and other articles by other people as well. And if you do want to take a deeper dive into this as a whole, do give me a shout. I run sort of sales training for agency courses, so a little plug at the end. But if you want to go deeper into this and look at your whole sales process and how you master those various conversations, give me a shout. But otherwise, for now, I hope that helps. I hope that helps you to separate those tire kickers, uncover the serious buyers, and give you some tools to enable you to manage that key conversation at the beginning of the process.
That was great, Ben. Is there a last slide with your contact details on, I think?
I've just
I'll share them anyway, but just while we're doing the last bit, you might as well have them on screen in case anyone wants to jot them down straight away.
There you go.
Super, thank you. I had a question actually, which it might be best reading your ballpark question article might
Oh, yes.
But it was about, obviously, as an accountant and someone who loves process, I love the idea of the framework. And I always say that I know some people look at it and feel a bit put off that something's going to be maybe too scientific and too methodical.
Yeah.
But I always say that it's putting a process together like that. It's about assembling the best of your thinking, because if you
Mm.
don't do that and you don't document it, you're leaving it to chance. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
so many things to think about that
Yeah.
you'll end up missing something and think, oh, if I only had thought about that. So if you have the
Yeah.
process, you could still decide to maybe soften certain parts of it in certain situations. But if you don't have it in the first place, you're leaving too much to chance, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. That and that's the point of a framework for me. It's when I used to go into meetings, I might have this framework of some questions on my iPad, or I might even have them printed out. It didn't necessarily mean that every single conversation I ticked every single box. But what I could do at the end of the conversation, even before I put the phone down, I used to say something like, "Look, I've got a few things that I really wanted to cover on this call. Can you just give me 20 seconds just to check back and just make sure I've got everything?" So I might even do that there and then, and then go, oh, actually, yeah, there was just one thing I wanted to check about this, and then try and tick that box there. Or it
Yeah,
might be that you review the call afterwards and you look back at your notes and go, actually, there's a couple of things that we didn't quite cover there. That's fine. You might not cover everything on that first call, but at least you know if you're going to have a second conversation where the gaps are. And that might be sending them an email and saying, look, I just wanted to cover off these points, or it might be just helping you shape your next conversation with them. So yeah, I agree. What we don't want to do is make this too robotic and
yeah,
scripted. We've all been on the end of sales calls where the person on the other end is clearly following a script, and
yeah,
sometimes they can't move away from it, and it feels really robotic and unnatural.
yeah.
I believe sales conversation should feel like you're down the pub on a Friday night with a mate after a couple of pints. It's kind of quite casual,
With a
formal.
checklist though.
Yeah, with a checklist and probably minus 5 pints, I would suggest as well. But it should feel quite natural. You ask a question when you're down the pub with a mate. You ask a question about how they're doing or something. They'll give you a response, and then you think up a next question on the basis of how they've responded, and it feels very
Yeah,
fluid and natural. And I think that's how our sales conversation should be. We should have a
yeah,
framework and a checklist, but we shouldn't be robotic about it.
yeah. That's really good. Thank you. And then there was something you used the phrase "excitable puppy," which I really liked. And I sort of read that as we opened this by talking about how sales cycles have arguably slowed down, particularly
Yeah,
in 2023, and now it's taking longer to get decisions.
yeah,
I've written slow down in order to speed up. So
yes, yeah,
often I guess it's because we're going through so excitable, and then got the proposal out and then it's gone quiet and then it's taken forever to get a response. Actually,
yeah,
if you'd put more time into that process,
yeah.
you'd probably end up spending less time over the long run and get higher conversion rate and a shorter
Yeah.
sales cycle.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think I have a graphic in another deck which kind of breaks down the whole sales process and uses the classic kind of 80/20. And the reason why I show that is say, well, actually, if you invest more time up front,
Yeah,
you will have to invest less time later in the process. So if you're finding yourself getting to the proposal stage, and that's where you're spending most of your time, either writing the proposal because you're kind of second guessing what's going in there because you haven't had enough conversations. So you're thinking, well, let's just chuck the kitchen sink in and put everything in there. That's going to take you a long time. And quite frankly, who likes writing proposals? Nobody.
yeah,
But then if you're getting lots of objections at that point, lots of questions and lots of pushback and lots of, we're not sure about that, or the budget, that suggests to me you haven't invested enough time at the beginning. And the more time you
yeah,
invest up front to qualify and to discover their real needs and opportunities, the less time you'll spend later on. Or you'll end up weeding people out because you realize actually they're not serious, they're not in a position to buy. Let's
yeah,
have that conversation, and then we'll speak again in 3 months.
yeah,
But don't rush towards a proposal where you're trying to use that as a means to test how serious they are. We can do
yeah.
that at the beginning.
And what would be your advice if there was a prospect who was seemingly in a rush, maybe for valid reasons? Maybe they've left things a little bit too late and they do want to get to a
Mm.
proposal quite quickly. Would you be flexible in terms of following the framework? Would you politely decline?
I want to understand why. I'd want to understand why the rush, because I think actually when when often it would always be a bit of a red flag for me if we were suddenly brought into a process quite late on and they said, oh, we need a proposal on our desk by Friday. I'd always want to know why. Why the rush? You're looking to spend potentially an awful lot of money with an agency in these services or projects, whatever it may be. why are you rushing towards a decision quite so quickly? Because it feels like this is quite a big decision. So I'd want to understand, I think, why that is the case. On the flip side, look, if somebody comes to you and they've maybe been referred, for example, they're not speaking to any other agencies, they want to work with you specifically, and they know what they need to buy, and actually you agree with that, and you say, yes, the thing that you need is spot on. We agree with that. And we shouldn't make this whole process more complicated. We don't need to slow the whole thing down and say, right, we're going to work through all of these steps if they meet that criteria. So we should make things more complex than they need to be. But I would kind of suggest that those sorts of opportunities are probably quite few and far between, where
Yeah,
somebody does come to you, they're ready to buy now, they want to work with you, they know exactly what they need, and you agree with that. I
yeah,
don't think that happens that regularly. It'd be nice if
no,
it did.
yeah.
Um,
It's the red flags you're talking
it
about.
is, it
Yeah,
is. So I think, yeah, if somebody does come to you and it's right, I need a desk, I need a proposal on my desk by Friday, and it's sort of Thursday afternoon, I'd really want to dig into why that is the case, rather
yeah,
than doing what we often do is, okay, then that's fine, we'll do that. Because you can again waste an awful lot of time and resource in getting that proposal over on Friday, and then what happens? You never hear from them again.
yeah,
So yeah, just be mindful of that. I think that's where you really need to double down on, okay, well, who else is involved in the process? How did you shortlist those agencies? Why have you come to us specifically at this stage? So you can be confident that if you are going to invest in a
yeah,
proposal, you stand a good chance of winning it.
yeah. Great. Well, quite most people, I think every person has stayed on the duration, Ben, which obviously is a positive
That's a
sign.
good sign.
So just to finish off, could you just share a little bit about how I think you alluded to it modestly during the presentation, but give people a bit of a feel for how you work with businesses and how you might be of help to the people that are listening today.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to do that. I mean, I'll keep it fairly simple. I'm a business development advisor, sort of mentor to typically kind of sort of smaller independent agencies up to sort of 25 people. That was my background and experience. I was a team of one in a Brighton-based agency for about 13 or 14 years, and sort of grew that agency to about 1.3 million, 25 people. That's my experience. I haven't done the big London network agency thing and so on. So first of all, that's typically who I'd work with, and I look at three kind of interrelated areas: positioning, which very much kind of lays the foundations for a lot of what we spoke about today. So helping agencies really understand that kind of ideal client, their strategy fundamentally. That's what positioning is. It's business strategy. The second area is helping them devise a relatively straightforward kind of lead generation plan, and then coaching and training them on how to execute that, ideally themselves, so they're not sort of farming and outsourcing to other people. And the third area, which is really what we spoke about today, is the sales piece. It's looking at the end-to-end sales process, from inquiry coming in all the way through to onboarding, and all of the steps and conversations that happen in between, to ultimately give an agency a better chance of winning the right opportunities, and also weeding out, as we spoke about today, weeding out those that are not quite right for them. So that involves typically sales training, building sales playbook, so it's all documented, and it's almost that kind of guidebook, so you can hand it over to somebody and say, this is how we do sales in our agency, based on a lot of the principles that we spoke about today.
Yeah, great. Well, as you said, we only touched upon a small part of that today. Probably
Yes. Yeah.
arguably the most important part, 'cause it's at the start of the inquiry stage, but there's
Yeah.
lots more that comes after that, and obviously all the positioning stuff before it. So if people are interested in exploring more of that, then either let me or Ben know, and we'll be delighted to put more content on if it's useful.
Thank you very much. I've got a question for you, Paul. How did the poll come out? I kind of saw it flash, and then I.
Yeah, I think it was about 70% on the increase.
Okay. So my
Yeah,
sort of anecdotal stories of timelines increasing very much reflected by the audience today. So most people saw an increase in that timeline. Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. It's probably why they were
Yeah.
here today.
Yeah. Well, hopefully some of what we spoke about today will help to maybe change that picture in 2024.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Well, I'll share the slides with everyone. Obviously, people get your contact details. They can reach out directly if they need anything, Ben. But thank you for your time
Yeah.
today. We appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul. Really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.